Mickey, what drew you to the subject matter of the film?
Well, I've been a investigative journalist for 25 years now, and every time I come up with a new idea, it's normally because I'm curious about things. In this case, I was as a consumer at my local supermarket to buy a chocolate bar, and that was back in 2007. There were 6 chocolate bars. One was a fair trade label, and the other one didn't have anything. And I was just wondering if one is fair trade, is the rest then unfair trade? So that was basically my whole beginning of getting into this issue. And then I realized at that time there was not much about child labor or trafficking of children in the chocolate industry. So I started to dig into it. A few studies from US universities have been looking into it, and maybe 2 reports and a piece in a magazine. That was it. No one was talking about it in a bigger picture. So then I did the first film and the follow-up film, and now the third one. Since 2007, The Chocolate War is the newest one. It went out in end of March, and now it's traveling around the world.
Oh, by the way, can you say the names of the first 2 films?
Yes, the first film is called The Dark Side of Chocolate, and everybody can find it on YouTube because it's just been spread out all over the place. And I think it's out even in Russian and Chinese, and people are using their skills to make subtitles. And then the second one came 4 years later in 2012, and it's called Shady Chocolate, and it's also on YouTube. And it's a follow-up on the first one, The Dark Side of Chocolate, which was more like a revealing of the actual action on the ground. I went out to see if I could reveal how trafficking of small kids are being lured from Mali, Burkina Faso into Ivory Coast. At that point, Nestle and Cargill, they just rejected everything that there were even a problem at that point. They were like surprised about it back in time because no one was knowing anything about it. If you went to any website at that time, I remember this very clear, there was not a single word about child labor. Fortunately, no companies, chocolate makers, small or big one, would have a website or anything where they don't mention it as by the way, we might have some troubles with child labor, or they never say anything about trafficking of children, but they talk about child labor as a legal and on the edge illegal. That's how they talk about it in the general public, because they know that if it's illegal, they are breaking the law, and this is where Terry comes in.
Yes. Okay. So Terry, I'll turn to you right now. For someone who's joining the discussion but who might not have watched the film yet, can you describe the factual background? And then also, since these are law students watching, can you identify the legal issues for them?
Sure. Well, first of all, we need just a little background context. As Mickey said, in the late 90s, people had no idea what was going on in Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, or Burkina Faso. Mickey's film was really the first expose. But by the end of the late 90s, early 2000, it was you could get into Cote d'Ivoire. There had been civil wars. It was very dangerous. So people started doing more research and sort of fed on each other, helping each other and getting the word out about how bad this was. And we participated in that and did our own research. And we were part of a group that took that research to Congress in 2001 and demanded action. And almost immediately, the House of Representatives, by a huge bipartisan margin, something you would never hear of today, Elliot Engels, who now is no longer the representative from New York, he sponsored the bill. It passed by a huge margin that would have banned the importation of cocoa unless a company could show that their cocoa was not harvested by children. We caught him by surprise. So when it went over to the Senate, they lawyered up and lobbied up. They hired Bob Dole and Mitchell to be their lobbyists, and they went behind closed doors. And when they emerged together, all happy as they do when they get bought out and sold their souls, they had changed this law from a law to a voluntary protocol. So in 2001, all of the major cocoa companies signed the Harkin-Engel Protocol. It's on our website. You can Google it, Harkin-Engel Protocol. And it has really strong language. They admit that they're using forced child labor. They admit that they're using the worst forms of child labor under ILO Convention 182, and they promise to stop by 2005. So my board member was Tom Harkin, who was the father of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. He was the senator from Iowa, and Cargill was one of his biggest contributors. And he literally told me not to do anything and to wait until 2005. And the board was on his side. So I was directed as general counsel at that time to wait to see what happened. So 2005 rolls around. They hadn't done anything and instead gave themselves an extension of time until 2010. So think of the evil genius of that these companies admit that their supply chains have forced child labor and hazardous child labor. And instead of fixing it, they say, well, give us 5 more years. Those kids will be fine. So they just did that. So without checking with anybody, I filed the first lawsuit in 2006 under the Alien Tort Statute, which used to be a very effective tool for human rights litigation. It was drafted in 1789 by the first Congress, and it essentially says an alien can sue in tort for violations of the law of nations. So we had a perfect case. No one disputed that child slavery, forced labor are violations of the law of nations. We filed the case. And it unfortunately became a vehicle, one of the vehicles for corporate America to gang up and denude the Alien Tort Statute. And ultimately, this case in 2020, the Supreme Court ruled on the case, and using a precedent from Kiobel versus Royal Dutch Shell of extraterritorial standards, they imposed on this very simple, elegant Alien Tort Statute a new requirement that you have to show that the wrongful acts touch and concern the territory of the United States. They completely invented this out of whole cloth, and because Cargill and Nestle were enslaving children through their cocoa farms in Cote d'Ivoire and Mali and Burkina Faso, that did not touch and concern the territory of the US. So it's unbelievable. For law students, I just want to emphasize that the conservative justices, the textualists as they call themselves, or the originalists as they call themselves, they took a 16-word statute that was drafted by the founding fathers that we considered like the terrain of the holy. And it was a perfect human rights enforcement vehicle. They took that original language and added more words than 16 to impose their own invented extraterritorial standard. Why? Because they wanted to protect corporate America. This statute, the Alien Tort Statute, had been used for years to go after dictators and rogue CIA people who came back to the US for human rights violations, and everyone thought it was terrific. The minute we went after corporate America, the Supreme Court circled the corporate wagons, and capitalism won the day, and they shut down our statute. So today, maybe I'll stop there, but we are using different tools today, but they really did effectively repeal the Alien Tort Statute.
So actually, why don't you continue? Talk about today.
Okay. Well, in our case, it's called Doe versus Nestle. You'll see that the Ninth Circuit twice, it's Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco twice ruled in our favor. We created an aiding and abetting standard. The Ninth Circuit's decisions had horrible language for the companies. You really were angry with these companies, not only because they were enslaving children, but they promised to do something about it and they didn't. So we thought we were on a roll until the Supreme Court granted cert. And I remember very clearly that it was on July 7th. They held over from normally the end of the June term. It was on July 7th, 2020, they granted cert, and then we had argument at the end of that year, and then they made their ruling in 2021. But we knew once they took the case that they weren't going to affirm the Ninth Circuit very strong opinion that really smacked corporate America down, and that we were probably going to lose. We weren't sure on what rationale. And the Nestle and Cargill, they got pretty bold. They hired Neil Katyal, who used to be Obama's Solicitor General, who's now at Hogan Lovells, the biggest gun they could find to argue this case. And they literally argued in the Supreme Court that corporations are immune from human rights law because they're corporations and not people. Now, that was bold. That for someone to stand up and argue that. And then they also argued the extraterritorial jurisdiction didn't apply. Much to our surprise, 5 of the justices, including Alito, strongly objected to the notion that corporations were immune under international law. So we got 5 justices saying, no, that can't be. And the others didn't mention it because that was not the rationale of the decision. But we knew we were going to lose, and we ended up losing based on this extraterritorial jurisdiction. So we took steps to prepare for that. One of the things we did is we went back to Mali and located some more recently freed children who were enslaved on cocoa plantations, and we found 8 very good willing plaintiffs who even said we could use their names instead of calling them John Does, because they wanted to be known as the people who went after this horrific practice that they endured. So we filed a new case in February of 2021 under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It's a relatively new statute by amendment that allows us to sue anyone who is in a venture that benefits from either forced labor or trafficking. So we constructed a very clear way to get there, that each of these companies is in a venture with their cocoa plantations, that they've been working with the same ones for years, and they've been really aiding and abetting their child slavery. They're also in a venture with each other. They formed this thing called the World Cocoa Foundation, and they sit around the table and plot and scheme on how they're going to present their child labor problems so that it looks like they're working on them. One of the things they did right away when they formed is they gave themselves that first extension of time, and they have since given themselves 3 more. And right now they're claiming that by 2025, they will have reduced by 70% their use of child labor. So now that's even more evil genius, that they've given themselves really all the time they want to continue to profit from child slavery while admitting that it's still going on, and they're getting away with it. There's no call for their heads. There's no new legislation. So we have this new case pending. It was initially dismissed by a Trump judge on a standing question that we are now on appeal, and we are confident we're going to win that. And we also took a somewhat ancient law that we have called the Tariff Act of 1930. Section 307 allows us to file a petition with Customs and Border Protection to seek to ban the importation of cocoa that is made with forced child labor or forced labor generally, and that petition is pending. It's been pending too long, but it's still pending with Customs. And so we have those tools, And we and others have taken to now suing the companies for consumer fraud, for misrepresenting to the public that they are not using child labor and their cocoa is child labor free. And we had a fairly recent win in federal court in the Central District of California in Los Angeles, where the court denied Nestle's motion to dismiss because there were credible allegations that they have affirmatively misled the public about what they're doing to stop child labor and whether their cocoa is child labor free. So those are the other things we're doing. And as Mickey and I both agree personally, he's continuing to promote this. He's done more. He did a Channel 4 episode on Ghana and Mandalay using child labor after they promised to stop in a different way. But as long as we're breathing air, we are going to continue to go after this problem. The fact that 2022 is here, almost 2023, and there is still a massive number of children who are enslaved working for multinational companies. The US Department of Labor paid for University of Chicago to do a study in 2020, and they found that there are 1.56 million children harvesting cocoa today in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. That is an astounding fact. I'll stop there now.
And that's actually pupils who doesn't go to school. We're talking about this as a full-time job, if you like. So it's not just, you know, what I've heard people say, no, they're just like, it's a culture, they're just helping out the family in the plantation. That's not right. We are talking about 12 hours work. I've seen it so many times. I've been to Ivory Coast, I think 12 times now since 2007. And it's unbelievable. It's all over the place. You go into a random place, you find children. And every other time you find children from Burkina Faso or from Mali, they are just victims of trafficking. So saying that they don't know it, and that was the most surprising thing for me when I went to court, to the court hearing, and listening to the counsels from Nestle and Cargill. They said that they don't know where the cocoa beans come from. They just buy them. But in the film Terry goes to a big Cargill. It's not a corporation. What's a
cooperative?
Cooperative, yeah. And we were sitting relaxed with the chief of the village and the guy who's in charge of all the cocoa beans from 1,000 farms in that area, and they said, we know exactly where every farms are. We now have the coordinates, we have the names, we know exactly where the bean comes from. So basically they can trace it back to the specific farms. So saying in court, and that was a big lie, which really was so frustrating for me, because they said, we don't know where the cocoa comes from. It's just like something we buy from Cargill, in this case, Nestle. And I don't really get how they are willing to lie in court from a layman's perspective, which is mine. That's just like so surprising, because it's quite sophisticated, the system. Of course they know where it is from, because you need to be able to know where the beans, if there are bad qualities and all that kind of stuff. So they know the names of every single farmers, but when they go to court, they don't know anything.
And Mickey captured that so brilliantly in the film, that while their lawyers were lying in the Ninth Circuit, and that's why we got such a strong opinion out of the Ninth Circuit, because the judges knew they were lying too, based on the allegations of our complaint. And then he would flip out from the court scene and show us in Cote d'Ivoire with child slaves that were working for Cargill. And it really, really was a great scene, Mickey, the way you handled that. And I want for the law students to hear that the lawyer who was doing the most lying for Nestle in the Ninth Circuit was Ted Boutros, who's with Gibson Dunn, the very Ted Boutros who went after Steven Donziger in the Chevron case and sued him for RICO and did all those horrible things to my friend Steven Donziger. They're a really evil firm. And if you're thinking about going over to the dark side, please don't go to work for Gibson Dunn. They're really, really evil.
Okay, so I've got a question that's really for the both of you. Just thinking about the power that these transnational corporations wield and the complicity of the governments, right? And which you show very well in the film, Mickey. Can you talk a little bit about the process of making the film? Like in the film, you know, you talk. There's one part of the film where Terry, you're talking to the law students about, you know, like maybe you could get arrested, and so just kind of describe what was it like filming under those conditions.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you make a film like this without an ending, believe me when I'm saying, when I started in 2015 reaching out to Terry and realized that we have mutual friends and we've been working on the same issue from two different angles, and then we combined it, that was really that was so great. But you know, when you start a film, normally when you're producing anything, you have a kind of a sense of where it ends and when, where it ends and when it ends. In this case, it was completely up in the air and made it so difficult because it's quite expensive, of course, traveling to quite unsafe places like Mali and Ivory Coast, but especially Mali. And so planning it was almost impossible. We had to film as we were going, and we never ever knew what was happening next. We could have been arrested. I've been arrested with my American cinematographer back in time when I did the first film. Fortunately, he is American citizen, so the embassy came and took him out, and he said, "I'm not going if this guy's not going." That was me, and I'm Danish citizen. And so he was looking at me and say, "Okay, we take him too." So we got released, but you never know when you're traveling in these countries, and planning was impossible. And when you see in the film the scene, we have just been into this cooperative of Cargill, and like minutes after, our local helper and fixer Ange, he got a text from a friend who was sitting like hours away in Abidjan. We were in the bush, saying, "Are you working together with Collingsworth on this child labor?" And it just spread like this. And I have to say, at that point, and I'm sure that Terry can confirm that, I get extremely scared because, you know, having a team out there. One thing is, you know, I was filming illegal because I don't have any permission, basically, because we wouldn't be able to film with a permission. That's not how it works, because then we will have like a tons of security, and they will tell us what to do and not to do, and that's not free speech at all. So in this incident, I was like, okay, we need to get out of this area very fast, otherwise it goes like. And I had a very serious chat with our local journalist, and he said also we need to leave here, because it was a different area with a not the same jurisdiction, but it's like, you know, states. So it can varies where you are, and they said they're really connected with the companies because it's the most important cocoa belt in Cote d'Ivoire. So we had to leave, and I have to say, still this day, I'm thinking about a journalist, a French-Canadian, Guy-André Kiefer, who were digging into this in 2006 in corruption in the cocoa industry, and he disappeared. And his body has never been found, still this day. and may he rest in peace. I'm just like, it's serious business out there. And one thing is I have to take care of myself, but we are a big team out there. And we had two young law students with us, and I was just like, whoa, what's going to happen if they get arrested? Of course, we had a lawyer just around us, but it's just quite stressful in a very hot environment. And so, and we're not able to plan. You know, we don't know what people will say. We hope that they will talk to us, and it's like give and take out there. And people think it's very like produced. Of course, the film is story told, but in terms of producing it, you can't predict. It's real documentary. We are filming a lot and see what comes out of it in every scene. And I have to say, when I started, we had two outcomes. Either Terry and his team will win in court, or they will lose. That was the only thing I had to like. That was my kind of point at the end of the tunnel. That's what we can either go this way or this way. But I, to be honest, as a filmmaker, of course I care about it, but I had to make a decision of, okay, do we not have a film if Terry doesn't win? Of course we have, because I think it's so important for the general public to get an insight of what it takes to sue and how to battle against some of the richest companies in the world, and also how difficult it is. And it's also a kind of an insight you never get. I think it's such an important learning for me also, but also for the viewers to see how things works. It's not always like it is in social media, honestly. It's more complicated than that. And so I think, you know, it has been out of my 85 films, the most difficult one to make, because you never know where it brings you. And on the other hand, I didn't know about Terry. Imagine if he halfway in said, hey, Mickey, I am sick and tired of you. I'm leaving. No, I didn't know. You know, you just need to rely on this trust in between us. But I think now we become so close and good friends. So now I'm really trusting you, Terry, not leaving.
Likewise. I just want to add to what Mickey said, which was an excellent description of how difficult it was. That, like, every time we went, we did not start out to go to plantations that we knew where we were going, and we did not know there would be children there. We're just driving down the road, and Anjaboa, who's a local journalist, who, by the way, Cargill has gagged now by complaining to the government that he is no longer an independent journalist because he's on our team. And that's the kind of power Cargill has in Cote d'Ivoire. But we would just see some cocoa trees and stop. 100% of the time, it turned out there were children there, but we didn't know that. We brought our teams. I brought other lawyers. Mickey had a camera person, a videographer, and we ended up always getting, I don't know if I'd call it lucky, but the way that it turned out, we always found those children, and they were willing to talk to us, the poor things. So this was really hard to do. And just one brief story is that one time Mickey did not go to Mali with me. I went with his cinematographer, and we went to the bus station in Sikasso, where a lot of trafficking occurs. The young boys go to this bus station, which is very close to the border with Cote d'Ivoire, and they're looking for odd jobs, like maybe they can get a tea shop job, maybe they'll get a meal out of that, or work in the bike repair shop, because these bus stations are very social places. And that's where the traffickers go, and they promise the kids a job in Cote d'Ivoire making big bucks. And we gathered about 20, 25 kids, and I asked them some questions like, do you know where Cote d'Ivoire is? Most almost no one did. Do you have anybody that you know that disappeared there when they were promised a job and never came back, and they didn't say that they did? And then I said, well, let me tell you, if somebody comes up and offers you a job and offers you money to go to Cote d'Ivoire, don't do it. Don't get in the van, because they're going to kidnap you and you're going to be a slave. Do you understand that? And they all nodded their heads. And then I said, well, but I have a job for you. I'll pay you all $50. It's going to be very easy. Will you come with me? How many want a job with me? And they all raised their hand. They would have come. I mean, there's no, you cannot quantify how desperate these kids are. And that's why the traffickers are getting away with that. Well, we were just finishing that session, and two cops came over to me and the cinematographer, and they were going to arrest us. And then I had a bit of a fit and pointed at the traffickers and said, arrest those guys. They're here kidnapping children. And I was like, go get those guys. And they looked at me like I was from Mars. And the next thing I know, we're being taken away to the station downtown. I mean, that's how corrupt it is. That's how difficult it is. You can't fix this just by having a program. You got to restructure the entire enforcement process. You have to make incentives there for the law to work. And you have to punish people who are taking bribes to allow children to be kidnapped from their country and taken to Cote d'Ivoire to be enslaved.
Thank you both. And I just wanted to go back to Anj for a second. So, Terry and I, we've been talking about doing this program here at Columbia for months. And pretty much from our first conversation about the program, I was like, oh, can Anj join? He's like, okay, I'm going to see if I can work it out. And then we spoke about it like a few months later again. And then finding the last time that I asked about it, he said, yeah, he definitely can't, because he's been gagged. And you described a situation where there was a screening of the film, I think in Europe or somewhere, and he was on stage.
That was me in front of the headquarters of Nestle and Vive in Switzerland, because they didn't want to talk to me and they didn't want to see the film. So I drove the whole way to the headquarters with a giant screen in front of the headquarters, and then we played the film until I got arrested.
Yeah. But to follow up on Carrie's point, that remember, Mickey, that Anj came to Copenhagen for the opening of the film in March, but he had been told by his employer, the news agency, that he could not speak, that Cargill had complained about him. So he was not able to come up on the stage with us, even that he had been gagged by Cargill.
Yeah. So, this is what we're up against. Okay. So Terry, can you talk a little bit about your NGO? I put the link in the chat for the students, international rights advocates, and other corporate accountability work that you're engaged in or have been engaged in.
Sure. Thank you. Well, we are a small nonprofit legal advocacy group that focuses now entirely on using the rule of law to try to hold corporations accountable in the global economy. We brought the very first corporate case using what used to be the terrific Alien Tort Statute against Unocal Corporation, which was later absorbed by Chevron. But Union Oil of California, Unocal, was building a pipeline in Burma, and they engaged the brutal military government there to provide security for their pipeline process. And that military gathered up villagers at gunpoint and made them clear the right-of-way of the pipeline and used them as human minesweepers because there was a civil conflict going on in that area. So we sued Unocal and Total, their French partner, under the Alien Tort Statute. And that was the first corporate case. And on the eve of trial, we settled. Unocal made an offer to our clients that we had to communicate to them, and they were just absolutely stunned at the size of that offer, and they accepted it. So we didn't get to do that first show trial. But since then, we've been just figuring out different ways to sue corporations. We have these trafficking cases and forced labor cases under the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, against Nestle and Cargill. We named 7 companies: Nestle, Cargill, Hershey, Mars, Olam, Berry, Callebaut, and Mondelez. And we also have a similar case against Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, and Dell for using cobalt mined in the DRC by forced child labor and trafficked child labor. And then we have some very old cases that are about to go to trial. We sued ExxonMobil in 2001 for, in their Indonesia operations, they have a natural gas drilling and processing plant in Aceh, Indonesia. They purchased a bunch of military from the Indonesian government and created their own private military force that wreaked total terror on the villagers who lived around the facilities in Aceh, murdered, tortured, and raped members of the community just consistently. So we sued Exxon in 2001, and we've been to the Court of Appeals twice, the Supreme Court once, and just in July of this year, the trial court finally denied their last summary judgment motion and is setting the case for trial. So 21 years later, and we're going to win that trial. And I hope we send a message to corporate America that that's how relentless we are. We're not going away. We're going to keep fighting and try to use the courts, no matter how they resist it, and they do, to bring them to justice. And similarly, we just had a huge win in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in our Chiquita Brands case, where Chiquita, along with many other corporations that were operating in Colombia during the civil conflict, they paid and hired a paramilitary group there called the AUC, which the US government designated a terrorist organization in 2001, and they kept paying them for 4 more years. And they killed probably 100,000 people in the Banana Belt, just pretending that they were protecting Chiquita, but what they were doing is slaughtering what they thought were communist sympathizers, because the rebel group, the FARC, was a left-leaning group. And Chiquita ultimately had to plead guilty to funding a terrorist organization, but we filed a civil case against them in 2007. And likewise, the procedural history is just mind-numbing, but we just won in the 11th Circuit. They overturned a summary judgment that was granted against us and directed that it go to trial. So we're feeling encouraged that we might be able to bring the rule of law to the corporations, and hopefully by winning a couple of these trials, when we say to them, we're going to sue you, or let's work and fix this, which is what we would rather do, that they'll take that seriously. I want to stress with the cocoa companies that at each opportunity we've had to meet with them, we've offered to help them fix the problem. We've said, look, let's work together. We know how to fix the problem if you really want to fix it. And no, they would rather have their public relations bogus programs that really aren't doing anything to cost them money. And last thing I'll say, Mickey, is we know that Nestle and Cargill, the litigation lasted 17 years. We know they spent over $100 million on law firms because they both had these giant law firms representing them. Nestle actually had 2, Hogan Lovells and Gibson Dunn. And we know that Neil Katyal, who argued in the Supreme Court, he actually bills $2,462 an hour. So if you're going to sell your soul, you're going to get a good price. And he did. They spent $100 million of lawyers. We don't know how much, but a lot on public relations and lobbyists. So let's say they spent $150 million. They must be making a lot of money on slaves because they're spending a lot of money to keep doing it. And if they had put $100 million on the table in 2001, when we first approached them, we could have fixed the problem. That's corporate America. Go ahead, Mickey.
No, that's one thing I keep wondering is, why is it, if I was able to sit at the boardroom at any of the big chocolate makers, I don't know, why is it that not any one of them want to be a kind of a first mover, because we live now in a time, where things are different. Post-COVID has changed the whole way we think. It's a new start, if you like. Good start, bad start. It's not up to me to judge, but it's different now. And there are more attention on things like climate change stuff. And why is it that a company like Cargill or Nestle doesn't make a decision saying, okay, let's be front runners. Let's go to Terry and take his word. Now we want to fix this. I am pretty sure that the business they would get out of it, it would be huge for them. It would be a business in itself, that they are the one who took the responsibility to change this, instead of doing like completely useless programs, because it doesn't really matter at all. At the end of the day, I have a really good friends who are farmers in cocoa farmers in Ghana and in Cote d'Ivoire. All of them say, please just pay us a decent salary so we can survive. Then we would not be able, we won't use children week. It's just a matter of getting a proper salary for what they do, proper price for the cocoa beans. And it's so easy. Instead, the companies are talking about the complexity of how the business is. Come on, guys. It's not complicated. It's really simple. Pay the salary, a decent salary, so the one who are actually producing the cocoa, which goes into the chocolate, actually get paid for what they do. At the moment, they get, when you buy a chocolate bar, they get around 6 to 7% of that price maximum. So, and that should be absolutely changed. But I don't understand why one company doesn't take the lead on this. It would be the best.
Well, we have made that exact pitch to individual companies. You'll have market advantage. You'll be known as the good company. And no one took it, Mickey. And I think there's two reasons. One, that their evil minds don't work that way. They don't think that people would reward them for being good. They think people only care as their candy bar is cheap. That's the way they think, I believe. But second, as I mentioned at the outset, all of these companies, they formed the World Cocoa Foundation to what they say is implement the Harkin-Engel Protocol. But they conspire within that group, and they are acting as a group. And I think it's an antitrust violation because they're all agreeing on price too. But no one is going to break ranks within that group. I think they view themselves as invincible together. And so far they have been right. But I have no doubt at all that if there was a good company, that they would be rewarded in the market. And the proof of that is Tony Chocolonely. Now, I don't want to burst any bubbles out there. Tony Chocolonely is as bad as all of them. They're no good. They lie. They're using Barry Callebaut to process their beans, one of the worst companies out there. But people think they're good. So people are paying more money for their bars, and they're successfully marketing themselves as a good company and showing that people want a good company. The problem is they're not a good company. They're just a good marketer. So I think that's the proof.
Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes left. If any students have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A. And so just very quickly, well, first, I just want to underscore a couple of stats that you guys shared in the film, that Nestle's annual revenue on chocolate is 5.7 billion. And for Cargill, I'm not sure if this is all for chocolate, but their yearly revenue is 134 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are huge. There are three, because Cargill is one out of three companies who actually buy up the cocoa beans and sell it to the to companies like Hershey and Mars and stuff. And it's Cargill. they sit on 35% of all cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire. And the second one is Olam, and the third one is Barry Callebaut. So they are giants.
So, Mickey, what are the next steps for the film?
I think what I am right now just waiting for the next step from a legal point of view to see where it leads us, because I'm pretty sure that further down the line we will see a good development in this. And before that, I cannot and will not make any decisions, but I'm pretty sure that we will produce a kind of a box set with all the films in one film where we collect all of it, but we need to have like the Exxon case where we go to trial. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the next, but you never know, because it could be something completely unknown for now, which could suddenly pop up, and then I'm ready to produce that too. So I'm in a waiting position and see where the legal cases goes at the moment, and collecting. And as Terry said, I did almost at the same time a film for British Channel 4 about Mondelez in Ghana and their scheme, so-called 100% sustainable cocoa life, which is completely bollocks. It was full of slaves, and Terry has taken the case now because it's a US company who owns Cadbury, which is the star of Britain.
Yes.
Oh, okay, and by this, you said the Chocolate War. I think you told me earlier that the Chocolate War would be available on Amazon Prime.
Yes.
Okay.
It will.
December.
In December.
Okay. All right.
I don't have the exact date yet, but in December. So just before Christmas.
Okay. Terry, Jackie wants to know what key laws you're using now that you cannot use the ATCA. And he said, yeah, Jackie said that they did not catch what you'd said regarding that.
Sure. Well, first of all, if anyone is interested in following up, go to our website, which is internationalrightsadvocates.org, internationalrightsadvocates.org. And we have a pretty good portion where you click down to cases, and it provides the briefs and the press and all of the other news about all of our cases. But putting aside now the Alien Tort Statute, we are primarily using the Trafficking Victims Protection and Reauthorization Act. That is at 18 U.S.C. 1595, 18 U.S.C. 1595. And we're using state tort law, unjust enrichment, negligent supervision, emotional distress. And then, as I mentioned, we're using state consumer laws. And California and Washington, D.C. have particularly good consumer laws. So those are the primary tools we're using. I also saw in the chat someone mentioned that what can a consumer do? And I think that's an important point to stress, that, yeah, we're asking people, don't buy any products from these giant chocolate corporations. And you'd be surprised. I mean, I think it was Mickey who showed me the seating chart for everything that Nestle owns. I mean, Nestle owns water, food. You can't believe how much they own, but we're asking people, don't buy their products. But take the next step. If you go on our website, we have one of those things, I think it's called a card. Some smart young person put it on there for me, where you can click on, let's say, Nestle, and it'll let you send Nestle an email. And we're asking people, don't buy it. Let them know you're not buying it because of their filthy record on child slavery. so that if they get enough of those messages, maybe one of them will finally take up the invitation that Mickey was describing to be a good company, not a company that profits from child slavery in 2022.
Okay, thank you. And let me see what else. And Terry, do you have any advice for students interested in corporate accountability?
Well, I wish it was really easy advice, but I do. See, the problem is just the resource distribution, that when you get out of a nice, a good law program like Columbia or any good law program, the corporate America is going to offer you, I think their starting salaries are like $200,000 a year now at the big firms. And if you want to go work for an NGO like mine, we're hovering down there like in the 50 range. So you have to take a huge pay cut to do this kind of work. But I want to stress that it's worth it. I wake up every day proud of what I do, happy with what I do, and feeling just amazing that I'm able to use these tools that we all learned together in law school as a force of good, and that it's worth trying to figure out how you can be a force for good with your law degree. Now, a lot of the NGOs doing this work, there's a handful of them. There's us, there's Earth Rights International, there's Center for Constitutional Rights, Center for Justice and Accountability. Those are some that come to mind. They don't do a lot of hiring. And the way that we do hire typically is someone volunteered as to do pro bono work with us. Maybe they have a day job at a law firm, and they're allowed to do pro bono work, and they come work with us and help us on a case. That we get to know you that way, and when we have an opening, then we're going to go to someone who's sort of proven themselves, if you will. But even if you can't get some kind of entry-level job doing human rights work, I think that all lawyers doing human rights work first need to be lawyers. That I spend very little of my time thinking about international human rights norms and standards. I spend most of my time thinking about the federal rules of civil procedure and the federal rules of evidence, because we're litigating a case. The subject matter happens to be the abuse of children or some other human rights violation, but you still got to be a lawyer first. So if you have ambitions to do this kind of work, it'll serve you well to go to some litigation firm and get a couple of years experience before you go try to market yourself as a human rights lawyer, and really bone up on evidence, rules of procedure, and corporate law, corporate structure law. Those are the three areas of law that I spend the most time with. And I'm not kidding, because I already said something bad about Gibson Dunn. I'll say another thing bad about Gibson Dunn, that if you want to go work for a human rights organization at some point, you can come out of a big firm. There's plenty of big firms that don't have the kind of really marketed image of being evil. The two that do are Gibson Dunn and Jones Day. They market themselves as being willing to represent Attila the Hun and Hitler. I mean, they'll represent anybody for money. And that is the image they're cultivating. They want people that do horrible things to come to them and pay them big piles of money to be their lawyers. So if you work for one of those two firms and come to me, I'm going to throw your resume in the trash. And I assure you, most of my colleagues won't be that blunt about it, but I will. And so if you're going to work for a big firm or a litigation firm, find one that does more amoral work. One company sues another company. Okay, that's fine. You're going to learn something in that process and get paid to learn. There's nothing wrong with that. I hope you can all find your path to do good. And as you're working for a private firm, if you're working for a private firm, then yeah, volunteer, do pro bono work so that you get known as someone who really does want to transition over from being in a private law firm.
Okay, so final question from Sabria. She wanted to know, Terry, what skills and experiences are the most important for law students to develop in school if they want to do corporate accountability work? I think you just answered that. She wants to know what you're looking for in an intern. And we had 2 wonderful interns at IRA last summer. So we can talk more about that, Sabria. And separately, what do you think about the co-opting of this work by corporate social responsibility professionals?
No, thank you for that question. Well, first and most important on the intern front, yeah, we had Carrie sent us over 2 fantastic interns last summer, and we rely a lot on interns. We always have in the summer 4 or 5 really good interns. So if you're interested in doing this work, and you can do a summer internship or a semester externship, go on our website and you can see how to contact me, and I'll definitely get right back to you. We appreciate those great volunteers. In terms of the co-opting of the movement by the corporate social responsibility people, yeah, it's really, really a problem. And lately, there's this new focus on ESG, environment, social, and government factors. So these companies, including, let's say, Nestle, I can speak quickly about that. All the big companies now are hiring people to write them an ESG report that then investors supposedly look at because they want to invest in good companies. These reports are complete fraud, just like the cocoa programs in Cote d'Ivoire. So if you go look at Nestle's ESG report, they get a very high score in social because they claim that they promote more women, they have more women in managerial positions, and they hire a lot of, they have a very diverse entry-level workforce. So they gave themselves an A in social. They don't mention, not one word in their ESG report says child labor. So that shows what a fraud this whole industry is, because anytime a company is evaluating itself, you have the fox guarding the chicken coop. They're never going to report negatively on themselves. So they hire firms and they get the result they want. So we're really trying hard to spread the word that this is a fraudulent enterprise. And we are discussing with other lawyers a way that we can bring a lawsuit under one of the consumer fraud statutes to really expose this ESG industry for the fraud that it is.
Okay, all right, so we've got to wrap up now, but thank you so much, Terry and Mickey. I know that the students have really enjoyed the discussion and the film, and thank you to everyone that is on the Zoom or watching the live stream. Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Oh, just great to be here. Thank you. I love to talk to law students, and it's always a pleasure to see Mickey. And Mickey, I hope we can meet in person soon. I think we're going to do that in February, but it's great to see you, my friend.
Okay.
Yeah, great. And thank you for being part of this. And please, out there, try and give them a bit of a, they have too easy, the companies right now. Give them some resistance. I think it's really important.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.